This is the Tallahassee Business Podcast, brought to you by the Greater Tallahassee Chamber of Commerce. Thank you to our sponsor, 223 Agency, a digital relations firm helping you maximize and develop your digital footprint. Check them out on the web at 223agency.com. Without further ado, enjoy this episode of the Tallahassee Business Podcast.
Hey there, Tallahassee. Welcome to another edition of the Tallahassee Business Podcast. My name is Jay Rebel. I am your host here. I'm with my wonderful partner in crime, Sarah Solomon. Sarah, how's everything going today?
It's another great day for a podcast.
Absolutely, as always on the company line. We've got another great show for you today, folks. One of my favorite people in town to sit back and listen to is joining us. If you're into economics, data, or trying to get some grasp on where the world is heading today, there's no one better to listen to than Dr. Jerry Parrish. Dr. Parrish, thanks for being with us. We're awfully glad to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Folks, if you don't know Dr. Jerry Parrish, you should. He is the chief economist and director of research for the Florida Chamber Foundation, a good friend of the building here at the Tallahassee Chamber of Commerce. And we have had the chance to get to know Dr. Parrish quite well over the last few years in a couple of different roles. You may have seen his name on an agenda of various chamber gatherings and meetings. Just last week, we had Dr. Parrish as one of our keynote speakers for our annual Economic Forecast Forum, which was wonderfully attended, and based on the reaction from the crowd, I think they really enjoyed the show. You also may have seen Dr. Jerry Parrish's name as part of our recent local government study committee report that we did on the state of things here in our community. He was part of a 9-member panel that we pulled together and kind of locked you guys all in a room for about 6 months and made you give us your best ideas on the future of the community. But we're thrilled to have you with us. And I guess maybe to start off, Jerry, tell us a little bit about yourself and how one becomes the chief economist for the Florida Chamber Foundation.
Well, I became the chief economist for the Florida Chamber Foundation by literally asking them for a job. I had been working at Florida Tax Watch, and I got involved with the Chamber Foundation on their Trade and Logistics 2.0 report. The Chamber's economist actually left and went to graduate school to get a PhD, and they needed an economist on the group that were working on this project. And I saw how the Florida Chamber and the Chamber Foundation work together to produce research and then to turn it into actionable policy with the lobbyists and the advocacy effort that they have. And that was very powerful to me. It's like, not only can you do the research and really get a lot of people involved to find out what kind of Florida they want, that they actually turn it into policy, working with the legislators, and I wanted to be a part of that. So I asked Tony Carvajal for a job multiple times. Actually, he turned me down at first, but I was persistent, and they hired me a little over 5 years ago.
Very cool, and you all do some great work. One of the things that our board members would certainly be familiar with is a product you do called the Florida Scorecard. If you've never been to one of our chamber board meetings, hopefully you will someday. We start every meeting with a review of the Florida Scorecard, which provides data on both a statewide level and then drills down to what's going on here in Leon County. We like to have a very informed board on that front. Jerry, tell us a little bit about what the Florida Scorecard is and how your team produces that.
Well, the FloridaScorecard.org is a website. It's free to use. It's available 24 hours a day. And literally, there are hundreds of thousands of pieces of data on it, both, like you said, at the state level and the county level. There, you can download charts from it, to use in your business, or if you're giving presentations in the area. You can also download the raw data and use it. And we update this thing every week. Every time data comes out, we update it. Me and one of our staff members, Tracy Lowe, over at the Chamber Foundation, She does most of it, by the way. But we know when the data's coming out. We were able to put it up there on the website for people to use, and then notify people, hey, there's a new metric out here. It may be the new, kindergarten readiness is one of the metrics we're waiting on. It should be out any day. Right now, only 53% of Florida's kindergartners are ready for kindergarten. And we've got a goal of 100% of kids being ready for kindergarten by the year 2030 out of our Florida 2030 project. So you can see the data point, and you can see the goal for Florida 2030 on the scorecard.
Tell us a little bit about that 2030 project. What does that mean?
Well, about 3 years ago, the Chamber Foundation decided it was time to do another statewide strategic plan. We do these about once every 10 years or so. But what we wanted to do this time is to literally go to every county in the state of Florida and get more than 10,000 people live in rooms to tell us what kind of Florida they wanted to have in 2030. And so we did, the engagement process. We also did a bunch of research on top of that and came out with a big report that is not just a report. It's got 39 goals that we have to hit by the year 2030 to be the kind of Florida that we want. We actually, Florida, most people don't realize this, Florida was an independent country. We'd be the 17th largest economy in the world. Our goal is to be 10th. By 2030. That's strong. That's a big goal. And our goal is to have 100% of third graders reading at third grade level. And there's all these goals that if we hit these goals, Florida will be a leading economy in the world.
What are some of those other goals that are a part of that? Great to have tremendous ambition like that. And I think, one of the pieces of data that always jumps out to me when we go through the scoreboard or the scorecard, is that there's going to be almost 5 million more Floridians between now and 2030. So, letting everyone know what the goals are as they drive across the state line to come live here is a good idea, right?
It is, and that's one of the forecasts that we have is 26 million people by the year 2030. And, I show slides about where those people will go and try to get communities ready. Mark Wilson, our CEO, said it the best. Hey, we didn't do such a great job, planning for the last 5 million people. Let's do a better job planning for the next 5 million. And so that's part of our process to let communities know, hey, here's what's expected to happen between now and 2030 in terms of population. Are you ready for it infrastructure-wise? Are you ready for it otherwise, schools and everything else? And at least give them some notice before people just start showing up.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hefty amount every day. I mean, and this year you've got the 2020 census taking off. No doubt will be picking up more influence in our nation's capital. I mean, the amount of people who are choosing the wonderful business and lifestyle environment we have in this state is pretty incredible. And one of the things that our board members like to ask me when I'm going through your numbers is, what does that mean for Tallahassee? And so maybe a good question to you is if there are 5 million more Floridians coming to this state in the next few years, next decade, what does that mean for Tallahassee?
Well, every county is going to be different. Mm-hmm. And we do have on our future cast the expected population range by 2030 for every single county out there. What's interesting, though, is as an economist, I would call this an endogenous variable. Uh-huh. And I'm sure very few people know what that means. But what that means is you have control over it. So this community has control about what type of people, are attracted to Tallahassee and how many people are going to be here. There's some communities out there that are really put the clamps on any further building, and so, and obviously they're going to have less population growth. There's some that want it. You got to remember Leon County, and I showed the map at the Economic Outlook event that we had at the Tallahassee Chamber. Tallahassee is surrounded by rural counties, and we call these rural areas of opportunity. But what that typically means is there's a lot of room for growth in the metropolitan statistical areas because there is land and there's places for housing if that people want to live in. That's one of our things that people are struggling with. And so people are moving out into the surrounding areas. I think there's a great opportunity here for that. But, Leon County has to understand that we're going to attract the kind of people that we want to attract. What are we doing to attract, those people that we want? And so it actually, it's hard to tell how many people we'll have here by 2030. It will depend a lot on what their perception is of this area and whether they want to live here or not.
And that's a great point, because one of the questions I get when I show them our numbers, we have a bit of a wide range for Leon County. People say, well, okay, what does that come from? And I said, largely whether or not we want them, I would imagine, which seems like is probably pretty close to the right answer.
It is, and this is a great town. We've got so many opportunities here. We've got this educational system here between FSU, FAMU, and TCC. I think we're poised to be one of the greatest producers of talent of anybody in the country, not just in the state of Florida. What if we created enough businesses to where we could hire those kids and keep them in this community? We'd get a younger community. We'd get more business. We'd certainly get a whole lot more tax revenue. Mm-hmm. And there's an opportunity. I teach part-time at FSU. I teach in the Master's in Applied Economics program. And I love to point out the fact of there are companies that have opened branches here to hire my graduates, kids that I'm teaching. One I like to hold up as an example. On their letterhead, it says, 3 cities. It says Washington, D.C., San Francisco, California, and Tallahassee, Florida. That's where their 3 locations are, and they moved here specifically for these Masters in Applied Economics students.
Yeah, there are some very sharp students there. We've engaged with a few of them at your suggestion over the years, and they're bright. They do great work, and we live in a world today where people were constantly looking for the answers to the test, so to speak. People want to know what's coming down the pipeline, and the communities and companies, organizations that are putting in the kind of effort that is needed to understand what the future looks like are undoubtedly the ones that are becoming successful. So maybe a way to pivot back into our conversation that from our local government study committee we did. What are the things that people in Tallahassee should be aware of as it relates to our community and sort of where the puck is heading, you think?
Well, like I said, Tallahassee has the advantages here. Whether we can capitalize on them or not, that's up to us as a group. And I have great faith in a lot of our leaders, but we do have some issues. One of the things that I brought up probably 2 to 3 years ago at the Tallahassee Chamber event is the number of kids living in poverty. Overall in Florida, there's 870,505 kids living in poverty. And we've got our share. We've got, I believe it's 9,999. And so what I like to show people is where they live in the county. So I'm sure most people now have seen my maps by zip code of where they're living. And, we've got 4 zip codes here in Florida where there's 1,700 to 1,800 kids living in poverty. Well, I think that's an opportunity. And a lot of good things are happening on that front. People are realizing the cost of leaving someone in poverty is big. What people may not have realized is the opportunity that comes in the form of tax receipts and lower crime and a lot of opportunities of preventing someone from staying in poverty. So that's why the Florida Chamber Foundation, as one of its 2030 goals, has declared at 21.3% of child poverty right now. Our goal is to have that less than half, less than 10% by 2030, and that's an aggressive goal. However, there's a lot of great things happening that can help that and help us reach that goal. And I think you're going to see some of them here in Tallahassee. Certainly, I'm very excited to see the Purpose-Built Community Project coming into town. If people aren't familiar with that, There's only 2 other ones in the state. There's one in Palm Beach, on the north side of Palm Beach, and there's one in Orlando. And I believe people are gonna be able to see kind of what the state of the art is of helping a community and keeping those people in that community and helping them, have a better life. And it also helps the areas around them. So very excited about Leon County and what's going on in Tallahassee. I think we're going to be on the front row seat of seeing really how people's lives can be changed for the better and communities can be built right there in front of our eyes.
One of those big indicators that always pops up, in particular, when you overlay some of the poverty data, is third grade reading scores. I think people probably hear that thrown around a little bit. What does that really mean on the ground for communities?
It was interesting because people that are in economic development kind of understand this. But I spoke to a group in Orlando a couple of weeks ago, and it was like the Cement and Concrete Association. And,
Association for everything.
And
right?
I talked about third grade reading scores, and one of the questions was, why is that so important? So I'm glad you asked that. Well, the way most people see it is in third grade, kids typically go from learning to read to reading to learn. It's a very pivotal point in a young person's academic career. And if they can get a head start and be reading at grade level, they're much more likely to graduate from high school. They're much more likely to do better in life. And so the Florida Chamber Foundation has been done extensive look at this. We're working on it now with our Prosperity Project. I've done a lot of maps to overlay third grade reading scores against poverty rates and other things in counties for people to look at and see. But we have to be careful. I warn people, just because a school may have a low third grade reading score doesn't mean it's a bad school. I've seen that people think that here, even in this county. What we have to think about is, do those kids show up for school? Have they eaten? Have their parents ever read to them at home? There's a lot of input things that we have to think about. So when we ask for volunteers, and what I did at the last Tallahassee Chamber meeting is, all I asked for people that were there was to adopt a classroom. If not even an entire school, just a classroom. If you can help a kid learn how to read in first grade or second grade and third grade, they're going to be better prepared for school. School will be easier for them. They're much more likely to stay in school. And you have to think about it it's our own economic interest here. A kid that graduates from high school compared to one that doesn't is going to make, on average, $250,000 more over their career. Well, Florida, this entire state runs on sales taxes, about 76% of our general revenue, and that's what we pay for schools and health care and those kind of things out of at the state budget. That comes from sales and use taxes. So it's actually in our own best interest to help people, to help them have better educations and better careers, and then they'll be paying more taxes, which that can help that, and the visitors we have, that'll help prevent us from having to impose a state income tax at some point.
Yeah, that's certainly something I don't think anybody wants to really deal with. If you want to see those numbers of population increase turn around the other way, that's a good way to do it. Great point on the schools. I mean, I think you might have said something along the lines recently that you might have a school that's got 55% third grade reading scores, and that might be a miracle. I mean, you've got some people that are doing some incredible work in some very difficult places, and the fact that those numbers are even as high as they are sometimes is pretty impressive.
It is, and that's why when I show the numbers, the score of the school is not the most important thing. I actually also show it how many kids in that school are not reading at grade level, because what we've seen, and I saw it happen here in Tallahassee, one of the companies here told me after that event that they were going to go adopt a classroom. And I think this is awesome. I'd call their name had I gotten the permission to do it. Everybody would know who it is. But that's the key, business engagement. And in a lot of schools, there's only 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 kids, that aren't reading at grade level. And I know our Rotary Club here has the Reading Buddies program. I know there's a lot of good things happening here. But the more people that are involved with the schools to understand what's going on and to help these kids just get a better start in life, the better off all of us will be.
Yeah, no doubt. The Florida Chamber, has a real statewide emphasis on combating poverty these days. Earlier you were telling me about some interesting things. People are starting to take notice of that work around the country. Tell us just a little bit about what that all looks like.
Well, yesterday I was up in Atlanta at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and one of the things that's been great is about 3 years ago I wrote a paper. We call it our Fiscal Cliffs paper, and it talks about the impediments of helping people get out of poverty. Especially for young families with kids, they're particularly affected, where they could be in a situation to where even a 10-cent raise an hour can prevent them from keeping their child in subsidized child care, which of course is very valuable, to have, because in some cases it's cheaper to, send your kid to a state university than it is to, to pay for their child care. But people are facing this issue. We calculated this the other day, and we've been working on this. What's been exciting is the Atlanta Federal Reserve has taken a look at this, and they just released a report within the last 2 weeks that verified all our assumptions, and they actually quantified the value of getting people out of poverty in terms of tax savings at the state and federal level. It's big numbers. And the most exciting thing for me is, in their reference section, they referred to the paper that I wrote at the Florida Chamber Foundation. So we've gotten a lot of attention, but more importantly, we've got more people involved because of it. And people are really understanding that, there's people out there, and literally the example the Federal Reserve used in a case in the state of Florida is they had a young family, single-parent family, 2 kids, age 4 and 6, located in Miami. That person was better off working 26 hours a week at minimum wage than they would have been had they been making $52,000 a year.
Wow.
So $11,000 versus $52,000, they were just as well off making that low amount. And so people, sit there and they won't take raises, they won't take extra hours, they won't take promotions because it's in their financial best interest. So we can't blame them. We would call them rational economic agents if I was talking to my grad students. Yeah. But people are rational, and if you lose money by accepting a better job, most people are not going to do it, and so we can't be surprised when that happens.
No, that makes total sense. And you made a good point there. I think the work you all have done continues to shine a light on a lot of things. And what happens is over time, as more people pay attention to these matters, you see policy change, you see mindset change, you see resource redirection, and I think that's absolutely happening here locally in Tallahassee. I mean, I feel like in the last 3, 4, maybe even 5 years, as you've seen more and more irrefutable data be publicized, be talked about, be risen to the public consciousness, you see people's behavior change. You mentioned purpose-built. I mean, that became a real priority here when some of the work that you all have helped bring to light started changing conversations. I think it's a big deal.
Yeah, that's exciting for me. It's business people would help, because it was the right thing to do. But now, between some of the research reports that we've put out, the Chamber Foundation, what the Atlanta Federal Reserve has done, and what my grad students have done over this past year as well, what business people are realizing is there is a return on our investment. At the state level, we can make money helping people get out of poverty. And when you show business people that, hey, there's a return on investment, they invest. Anytime the Florida Chamber asks businesses to become involved, they'll actually do it. They'll get involved at their local community level. They'll get involved at the state level. There's right now a bill going through the legislature that's talking about these fiscal cliffs, the benefit cliffs. And, it's really just to study them and see what effect it's having on the citizens of Florida. And it's a big deal. I'm very glad to see that our folks at the Florida Chamber have been involved. Our new director of our program at the Prosperity Project, Michael Williams, actually testified yesterday when the bill was up in front of a committee, so the legislature can study this and really understand the benefits of helping people getting out of poverty is big, quantifiable, big numbers, and it really makes sense to get as many people out as we can.
Switching gears a little bit, we are still in the midst of a fairly unprecedented cycle of economic expansion. I think if you look at, historically, how long you get into these bull markets where things keep going on the uptick, about 8-9 years is about the max, and we're up to about few years north of that now at this point, I guess.
We're 10 plus and counting.
Yeah, still rolling, which is good. I think you see a lot of 401ks heading in the right direction, which is nice. But that's not going to last forever. There's no reason for economies to just slow down for the sake of slowing down. But the question to you as chief economist, what's the prognosis for the next few years look like?
Well, on January the 9th, I just gave my forecast for the state as far as jobs and talked about the probability of recession. I expect Florida. Florida over the past few years, we've been growing jobs at the rate of about 1 out of 11. Every 11 jobs created in the U.S. has been created in Florida.
Wow.
It's a big number because on average, Florida should average about 1 out of 20. Yet we're doing 1 out of every 11. I expect another strong year. I expect us to create another 200,000 jobs this year. But more pointedly toward your question, the probability of recession, I certainly don't expect one in 2020. But every day, 24 hours a day on the FloridaScorecard.org, we have the probability of recession. And it's green or red. If the probability is going up, it turns red. If it's going down, it turns green. And so anybody can see this on our business climate and competitiveness pillar of the Florida Scorecard. Now, right now, it's 19.7% probability that we'll have a recession in the next 9 months. So way less than half. It's about half the probability of what it was last fall when we had crazy things happening in the bond markets.
Yeah.
The yield curve inversion that people like to talk about, consumer sentiment was sliding. That part of the market has calmed down, especially into December and January. Now, honestly, you have to be a little concerned about the coronavirus and things like that. But
hard to shut down one of the largest economies in the world.
It is, and that affects everybody. Yeah. And I feel pretty confident now we can DNA sequence things, that they'll figure out what to do about it here, hopefully sooner the better, I'm sure. But, I believe Florida's going to do better than the U.S., for the foreseeable future. But as far as the recovery getting older, I've had this question, what in your model that predicts the probability of recession accounts for the age of the recovery? And I said, there's nothing in there because the age doesn't matter. Yeah. Recoveries don't die of old age. They die of shocks. Now, is the shock of coronavirus going to be big enough to change things? It could if it gets out of hand. Are there things could happen? The probability will never be zero of us being in a recession. So you'll never see my tile on the scorecard go down to zero, but it's pretty low right now. Yeah. And as long as we maybe solve some trade issues, we don't have crazy things happen in North Korea or over in Iran. Those kind of things, those black swan events really can have an effect. But my hope is the coronavirus is going to get contained. They'll figure out what to do with it and stop it from spreading. And if so, I think we're going to have a really good year, especially here in the state of Florida. We've got 900 net new people a day moving to this state, bring a lot of wealth with them. They're bringing $1.19 million of adjusted gross income every hour of every single day to this state.
That's staggering.
It's a big number.
Yeah.
We've been helped by the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Certainly higher net worth of individuals compared to history, have started moving even quicker to the state of Florida. That's great for our sales tax situation. Like I said, 76% of our general revenue comes from sales and use taxes, and wealthy people typically spend more. And so we're in a really good cycle. I encourage people to enjoy this. All of us that lived through the last recession know what one is like.
Yeah.
And we tend to forget, but enjoy this. This is the good times. We're going to be looking back on this several-year stretch that we're in now. That most people that wanted to find a job can find a job, and business has been really good. There's been a lot of opportunities to help get people out of poverty here over the last few years, and I'm confident that's going to continue here in the state of Florida, and I hope for a long time.
No doubt. One of the things to maybe provide a quick definition or explanation for folks that's on the scorecard is wealth migration. You talked about people moving into the state every day. Explain to folks what wealth migration means, and when you look on our card here locally, you see that one's typically in the red, and why maybe that is.
That metric comes from the book How Money Walks, if people are familiar with that, and we link directly to their website on the Florida Scorecard. What that does is they get IRS data and find out where someone lived last year and file their taxes compared to this year. There's 3 counties in Florida that are pretty heavily negative. One of them is Miami-Dade. It looks like a lot of the Miami-Dade people have left and moved up to Broward County, and the Broward people move up to Palm Beach and on up the East Coast. But the 2 that really stick out are Alachua County in Gainesville and Leon County. What's happening there, and I'm convinced of this, especially when you look at where we're losing wealth to, is a lot of that is college graduates leaving. They're making a little or not much here, and then they go to Seattle. King County, Washington is the number 1 spot weighted by money for Leon County. So you get a college graduate that can kind of skew things. They start out with a job out there making $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year versus zero. It actually subtracts that from Florida. So it's a little skewed when you have a university town. But it's interesting that you can see overall most people weighted by money don't leave Florida. They may move from one part of Florida to another. But only in the heavy university towns do you see a real big migration out.
That's fascinating. Kind of bringing it back local here, maybe to bring things in for a landing. What are some things that if you're Joe or Susie, a business owner here in Tallahassee, you're trying to project looking at the spreadsheets for the next few years, what are things people should be aware of or anticipating or keeping a lookout for?
Well, I think we're in a really good, stable economy. When you look at things like the number of state employees, that really hasn't gone down. You would think that from all the headlines that we had lost, hundreds of thousands of state employees in there. They're not. That's a really good between the state and the 2 universities and TCC. That is a big component of our employment, and those are stable things. They don't tend to drop much. They typically in the university situation, they typically add employees rather than subtract them. So you've got these students coming in every year. There's a lot of spending power, a very stable workforce here. We're also doing a good job recruiting some companies. Most people don't realize that even Gadsden County has grown a lot of jobs. I showed that at the breakfast. They're on a really good path as far as growing. So not just Leon County's growing, but some of our rural areas right beside us are growing, and there is opportunity for businesses to move there and use Tallahassee services. So I think we're in a really good, stable growth period. We're not going to grow super fast. The large metro areas are the ones that are growing the fastest now and expected between now and 2030. Tallahassee's not a large metro area, but there's a lot to be said for the stability of having these large employers here, with new ones coming in to take advantage of the talent we're producing at schools. It's becoming so much more important that I believe in the future you're going to see more companies locating toward university towns where they can hire those graduates. And for me, that's great because, we keep them in the state, then they become Florida taxpayers. So I like that a lot.
Absolutely. And I think you're spot on. There's a ton of opportunity in this community today. If it's good for Florida, it's probably good for Tallahassee. There's a lot of things that are happening that we can benefit from, and I think you're finally starting to see people get really focused on trying to make some course corrections on some of these things that particularly keep people in poverty here in our community. I think that matters immensely. So I appreciate all you've done on that front, and you wanted to add to that a little bit.
I would like to add that. I have to give some credit here to the Tallahassee Chamber. It's not a popular thing to allow somebody like me to come in and show where kids are living in poverty in your community. Yet the Tallahassee Chamber was one of the first that actually invited me in to specifically speak about that. So I have to give this chamber credit that they were one of the leaders around the state, and I believe that's put us in the front as far as addressing it, and so I'm very appreciative of that.
Well, we appreciate that too. We appreciate you coming and being with us, not only here on the show today, but at various forums and things that we've had over the last few years, and especially the work on that local government study committee. Folks, if you've never read through that report, I think you will find that as we as a Chamber of Commerce are always the first to stand up and cheerlead when we do something very well, we're also trying to be very conscious of looking for the things that can be threats to our future. And there are a few out there. There are some things that do hold us back in certain categories, and we want to make sure we're paying attention to it, that we're aware of it, that we understand the data that underlies it, and that we collaborate with other partners across the community and the state to figure out how we can do better. And thanks to folks like Jerry, we have a bit of again, I feel like sometimes we get the answers to the test before we get into the classroom. We can see where the puck's going. We know what needles need to be moved. And that matters. Looking at the data, understanding what our future looks like is critically important. And thanks to folks like Dr. Jerry Parrish and the Florida Chamber Foundation, we were able to do that work better. Dr. Parrish, one last time, if people want to learn about the work you're doing, where's the best place for them to go?
They can go to the website, thefloridascorecard.org. And if they want to contact me directly, there's a little button on the bottom that says Contact Us that comes directly to my email inbox. And I'll be glad to talk to them, help them understand some of the data, make available the data we have around the state or the county or the zip code, whatever they're looking at. And, the more engaged they are, the better this community will be. So I'll be glad to help them.
Indeed. One last shameless plug. If people are interested in finding out more about the Florida State University Masters in Applied Economics program, maybe they want to bring someone in. You've got great interns there.
Yeah, we do. Every year we have a group of about 25 new grad students that show up in the fall. They need internships. It really helps them become better economists and better analysts, and they can contact me directly about that. They can contact Dr. Stefan Norbin over at the economics department at FSU. But these kids are doing leading edge research. They're doing machine learning. They're doing all kind of very high level economic analysis. They make great interns, and they get credit for having an internship while they're in school. And the internships typically run from January through May. they can contact me or Dr. Norbin over there. I'll be glad to help them find the right master's student that can help their business.
As an organization who has taken advantage of that before, I can't recommend it enough. Some very bright minds there. Dr. Parrish, thanks as always for your support and being generous with your time. We appreciate it. Thanks for all you're doing for our community and for our state of Florida. Folks, we appreciate you listening as always. We thank you for getting through a whole nother show, and hopefully you are enjoying another wonderful episode of the Tallahassee Business Podcast. Important to always remind you that we can't do this show without the support of our members and our sponsors, folks like the 223 Agency, a digital relations firm based here in Tallahassee, Florida, doing great work in our community. And if you want to spread the word about how great and wonderful your listening experience has been, we hope you will share the podcast. As always, you can go and find all the episodes available at www.talchamber.com. That's talchamber.com. We hope you like it, share it, review it, leave us a little note, and as always, tell your friends about it. Thanks for listening again. We appreciate you being with us. We'll talk to you real soon.